We talk about another cultural universal, and that's marriage. Most people in every society get married at least once in their lifetime. But why do people get married? There are a number of reasons why people get married, and some of them may not be what you might think of when you think about the reasons why people get married. But cross culturally, there are a number of reasons why people do. When we look at marriage from a cross cultural perspective, it's a culturally defined relationship between two people, most commonly a man and a woman, but we know that now there is marriage equality in many countries. But there are two people from different families who come together. Marriage regulates sexual intercourse. Marriage provides for reproduction. Marriage establishes rights over each other and children. And it also assigns a responsibility for enculturation for to either the spouses or relatives of the family. And depending upon the culture, this can vary. It's not always the spouse that has responsibilities for teaching the children what it means to be a part of the culture, but often it may be the relatives of one of the spouses that has primary responsibility or large part of the responsibility for teaching the children. Marriage also determines the division of labor in the domestic group. As we examine marriage, there are three of the most important functions of marriage that we take from this previous list of cross-cultural characteristics. The first is that marriage forms social bonds that provides for the children, and that is materially, socially, and culturally. It also defines our rights and obligations toward each other. And marriage also creates new relationships between families and other kin groups because the incest taboo, which we will talk about a little bit later, provides for most often marriage outside of one's own group or own family, and it forms new kin groups, potential affinal. And the word affinal stands for, if we think about it, by people who are related to us by marriage. Well, some people probably, when you earlier explored the question, why do people get married? In your head, you might have answered because two people love each other. And that's true. And we call those marriages companionate marriages. But they're not the only reason, it's not the only reason why people get married, not the only types of marriages that we see around the world. Companionate marriages are built on love, intimacy, and personal choice rather than obligation. But we do know that there are arranged marriages and other alliances that take place outside of the idea of companionate marriage. So why is marriage universal? Well, there are several theories as to why this is. The first is the gender division of labor. And the idea is that through marriage, the work in a household is divided up between men and women. This ad is a stereotypical ad that comes from a time in which the idea was that the man's place was to earn the money and the woman's place was to stay at home and provide for the house. As you can see, the copy from the ad, the chef does everything but cook. That's what wives are for. And that was an idea that was a prevailing notion in many of your industrialized countries. But when we look at how labor is divided up, there still are cultures where the women are responsible for things like cooking and other aspects of the household. The second theory as to why there is universality of marriage is a prolonged infant dependency theory. And that's where, because when a child is first born, it's dependent upon its mother, and the mother has her primary responsibility of taking care of the child. Unlike other animals, where, for example, a horse can get up and run very soon after birth, and there are many other animals where the infants or the babies, once they're born, are very ready to begin doing things for itself. Not so with humans. And so the idea that because the mother is busy taking care of the child and providing for the child, there are tasks that she can't perform, and she needs a male to help her and assist her in this process. The next theory is sexual competition. The idea that when there is a designated male for a female, it cuts down on competition between the males for that female, because we talked about earlier that marriage helps to extend rights over one another and obligation to one another. Because if you think about it for a moment, if you have a pet, a dog or a cat, you know the idea that they go into heat various times a year, and it's then where they mate and reproduce. Whereas with females, human females, that they are eligible all year round to potentially mate and reproduce. And because of this, it heightens competition. This theory goes, but when you have a female and a male designated toward one another, it cuts down on the competition that might otherwise be there. There's the postpartum feeding problem, which is another theory, which is very similar to an earlier one, but it's where because the female can't feed herself and the baby, she needs a male partner who can assist her and do things for her while she's again tending to the baby, feeding the baby. When we look at marriage, there are also some economic aspects that are a part of marriage. The first is bride wealth, or sometimes referred to as bride price. About 44% of the world's cultures have economic transactions. This particular one is where money is given from the family of the groom to the bride's family. The second, practiced in about 19% of the world's cultures, is bride service. And that's the groom works for the bride's family for a designated period of time, either before or after the marriage. In about 6% of the world's cultures, primarily among a lot of Polynesian cultures, there's the exchange of females, that when a couple gets married, the sister or female relative of the groom takes the place of the bride within the bride's family, and she lives there, she works there for a period of time. Remember, this is done to replace the work that she might have been doing in the household. And then generally, this female's young. When she becomes of age and becomes eligible to be married, usually she will marry and then leave that household. But it is a practice that is done among about 6% of the world's populations. The next is a dowry, which is something a lot of people are familiar with. A dowry is when the bride enters the marriage with her own money or goods. If you think about it, that when she comes into the marriage, her family gives this to her, and she enters it with usually a substantial amount. There's indirect dowry, which is not to be confused with a dowry, and that's where the groom's family gives money to the bride at or before her marriage, and this is practiced by about 12% of the world's cultures.